I think the students are too tired to care, and they don't see the relevance of English to their lives, and they don't see the chances they're getting.
You'll hear more of that in just a moment. From Asia News Weekly, this is Asia Now, the podcast featuring stories and interviews from the Asia Pacific region. Riddled with student loans and massive debts, some graduates come to Asia to teach English. Many wind up creating a life around that decision. How does one reach that conclusion? Well, that's one conversation taking place in Asia now. Hello everyone and welcome to Asia Now. I'm your host Steve Miller and I'd like to thank you for listening and downloading this week's podcast. Okay, so here's the deal. You've graduated from college, you've got that brand new flashy degree, but you're faced with school loans. Unfortunately, that is the situation for many. I myself was lucky enough to qualify for a state scholarship, but no matter how one pays for a higher education, the reality of the situation is that it costs more than ever to go to university. And when you're finished, good jobs just aren't always readily available. Then there's the fact that many of us have that wanderlust, that desire to get up, move about, and explore our world. So how do you go about solving the problem of debt and wanting to travel? For many, the solution lies in teaching English abroad. It's not something that I personally did right out of school, but did do later in my teaching career. In fact, I currently still work as a university professor teaching English. And I know a number of my former students listen to this podcast, so before I continue, I'd like to give a special shout out to them. Now, there are a lot of different websites out there that are dedicated to the whole ESL teaching thing. Blogs that tell the tales of expats moving abroad to teach English. Over the years, I've contributed a great deal of work to teaching English, specifically in South Korea, sharing my insights from the classroom as well as various teaching methods. Today on the podcast, I'm going to do something different. I've invited Victor Boggio to have an informal chat about his experiences as an English teacher in Japan. Victor is a Japan-based YouTube video blogger and co-host of the very popular netcast 2.5 Oyajis. Victor, welcome to Asia Now. It has been a while, so I'm glad that you decided to join us for this discussion. And before we get into the heart of the matter, the meat of our discussion.
I'm all for meat.
All for meat, yes. I wanted to give the opportunity to the listeners who may not be familiar with you to learn a little bit about you. More importantly, what brought you to Japan and how you got started teaching and living there.
Okay, to give you a visual look, I'm of a vague ethnic background. I'm actually born in Peru, but of Arab, German, and Italian descent, and Peruvian Indian descent. So I've got all that mixed up. So you can't tell what I am if you ever meet me. But I came to the States when I was a year. I went to the States when I was about a year old, and then educated, grew up in the States like a regular kid, and spoke a little Spanish, with my parents when I was a kid in the home, but outside, basically English was the dominant language in my life. And I wanted to become an English professor. So after graduating NYU, I had heard you could teach in Japan. It was pretty easy to get a job if you had a BA or whatever, college degree. So I thought, before I become a professor, I'll see if I actually have the teaching bug. So I'll take off a year before going back to school and see if I enjoy teaching. And I thought I'd try that out. Oh, and I wanted to know if I could learn another language, because since I speak Spanish already, I thought, I heard, Japanese is pretty tough. Let's see what that's like. So my initial goal was just come to Japan, learn Japanese for a year, and see if I like teaching for a year, and then head back to the States.
When was this?
This was 1992. And I never went back. Well, of course, I go back every year to visit, every 2 years at most. But yeah, I ended up staying here. So yeah, that's how I became a teacher.
Now, since this time, in your observation, how has English education in Japan changed over the years?
Wow. English education. Well, now just to clarify some things. I'm not I don't work in the school system. I don't work in high schools. I have worked in high schools. I have worked in universities, but mostly I work in my own eikaiwa, which is a kind of English language school that where professionals or people pay extra to get. People come here and pay to get classes. It's not part of any system.
Right. They're they're after school academies. In Korea, they're called hagwons, but essentially they're an extra school, a special school for more intensive type classes.
Right. But this is not after school. This is actually all day long.
Okay.
So for example, in the mornings we might have some elderly people or some housewives who are free. In the morning they'll come and take a class once a week or so, sometimes twice a week if they're really intense. In the afternoon, you might have some high school kids or junior high school kids, but it's mostly adults. And after in the evenings, around 7:00 to 9:30, which we call the golden hour. What's it called? Your basic prime time.
Right.
We get the OLs, the office ladies, and the businessmen, the salarymen. So not so much kids in my particular school. I did teach at a place where we had a lot of kids, but when we opened up this place about 15 years ago, my own private place, we decided that with my partner that just parents were too much of a pain in the neck. So that has not changed. We call them monster parents, and I'm sure you have them in Korea too.
Yeah, I've certainly heard stories over the years.
They're like helicopter. They're hovering over you like a helicopter to make sure that you're doing a good job teaching their kids, and they have these hopes that their kids will become fluent and bilingual. But of course, unless the kids put in the work, it's very rare that ever happens. Back to your question, what has changed?
Well, not so much what has changed, but what have you seen that has changed over the years?
What's changed is the way I teach has definitely changed. It started with just textbooks back in the day. But I guess about, when was it? About 19 years ago, we started, people started using media in the classroom more. And that would include anything from movies, TV shows, to CDs, and actually books. The weekly or the monthly language magazines like that CNN would put out would include little DVDs that you could use in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And that definitely changed. So we were able to teach real live English, using more interesting subjects. And in the past, it was just the boring old textbook. And some of them are okay, but sometimes it's hard to get students interested in something that's not really alive. But when you're teaching something from a movie or a TV show or the news, definitely the news, then things come alive. So that's definitely changed. A lot of people use more media. I think I was one of the first people ever, at least in Nagoya, to ever use movies in the classroom. So that's really changed. A lot of people are looking for that. And I went to a teaching conference I gave a lecture actually about a month ago. They invited me to address a whole room of high school teachers, and they wanted to know how to use media in the classroom. Easily, right? So that's something a lot of people still don't know how to use, or even computers. And there were a few of us there who were good at it. I was the only foreigner actually. Everyone else was Japanese. And we just gave everyone our take on how to make a lesson using movies or media or YouTube even or manga. One of the Japanese professors actually put up an anime and was talking about how to use anime in the classroom. So I think that's definitely different.
Well, let's talk about schools in general. In Japan, mm-hmm. What kind of English education do students get? Because they have it in their public school, and then many students also go to eikaiwas. So what is, I guess based on your observations and what you know about the public school program, what is the English curriculum?
Most of the high school students that I do know, and the other thing is I know a lot about this not firsthand, but because many of my students are actually high school teachers. They're Japanese high school teachers and, of course, teaching English or teaching other subjects in the high school. And I know of some programs where the kids will have literally 12 hours of English a week, yet cannot speak English. It's amazing. Some of them have conversation classes with foreigners at their high schools every day. I think the classes are 50 minutes long.
Why do you think that is? I mean, is it because the education isn't quality, or is it that the teachers providing it aren't well versed enough?
No, I think a lot of it is it's just the students are exhausted. I think the students are too tired to care, and they don't see the relevance of English to their lives, and they don't see the chances they're getting. I know there's one foreigner who works at an English school I'm sorry, high school, teaching boys. And he used to be a very sought after Eikaiwa teacher. He was getting, top rated private classes up to 10,000, 12,000 yen an hour, which is about $100, $120 an hour. And these kids were lucky to be in his class. But he said, half the battle is just keeping them awake. And it's not necessarily that they're bored. Bored. It's that they're tired. They have a 10-minute break between classes and they go to sleep. They take advantage of those 10 minutes to actually put their head down and fall asleep. And he'll walk in and they'll be sleeping when he walks in. He has to wake them up. And he has to walk around and poke them a little bit. Come on, don't fall asleep. So I think they're actually exhausted, is what I'm hearing. But on top of that, I've had here at my own Eikaiwa, I have high school students, and my brother also runs his own Eikaiwa as well. We do have kids who are amazingly fluent, and their parents are not foreigners. They're all Japanese, but they really did study. So, I can't tell you why why students don't learn. I will tell you that students who do learn are just sincerely interested in it. They really like it. So I guess the first thing you have to do is make it interesting for the students, make them want to learn. And I guess there's a few ways you can do that. One of them is making them realize that it's relevant to their future.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, in Japan, is it perceived that English is I won't say necessary skill, but a needed skill in terms of being successful in one's financial future? I mean, essentially, does speaking English have a value?
I don't think the kids see that at all. I think they look around and they see all their parents. No one speaks English, at least well enough to make it relevant. So no, I don't think so. Unfortunately, though, the most excited I've seen students is when it comes to that the subject of wanting to learn English is, I want to marry a foreigner. That's the most excited I've seen them. And they asked me how they can marry a foreigner. I said, well, maybe learning English would be a good first step. So they say, okay, I'll study.
That is an answer that I have never heard here in my teaching career in South Korea. Normally I hear, I want to be able to watch movies without subtitles.
Oh, no, that's a big one too. But that's a big one with adults, not high school students.
No, but this is even younger individuals and college-age children. But more importantly, they want to go travel. And they see the need to learn English as a, quote, international language. So if they run into trouble or if they need directions, they have an easier way of asking for help.
Yeah, that's exactly what my students answer at my school, where they have chosen to come here. So the students who I teach, I'm lucky because they all want to learn English. When I extend the class 5 minutes, they're grateful. But from what I understand, at the high school level, they're waiting. They're watching that clock. They're waiting for the moment the class is supposed to be over, and then they tell the teacher, "Class is over, teacher. Come on, look at the clock. Look at the clock." They're wanting to get out of there, so they don't really appreciate it.
And that is truly sad. I wanted to get your opinion about the future. There's been discussions about trying to improve the English language of Japanese teachers of English in Japan, so there's a less reliance on, quote, native speakers. What do you think will bear the future for English education? Do you think that will happen, or do you think...
The problem is the Monbusho, which is the oh my god, I forgot how to say that in English, the Ministry of Education, the Monbusho. I forget English sometimes with the technical words. Anyway, the Monbusho changes their mind every 2 or 3 years, and until about last year, they had decided that all English teaching in the high schools would be done in English. And the reason I know this is because, like I told you, my students are English teachers, and they were all panicking, like, "Oh my God, how am I going to teach English in English? I need Japanese to explain things to them. I can't imagine doing that." And of course, it's possible definitely possible if you're a native speaker. But it really is a question: how do you teach grammar? I mean, that's tough. Some things are really hard to teach without using your native language. But this year, the Monbusho reversed itself, and they decided that they're not going to go that way anymore. And that they decided to abandon that ultimatum that they had last year. And now everyone's relaxed and they don't worry about it too much. So yeah, one of the problems is I think, inconsistencies. Oh, and I've seen some of the textbooks they use in the English schools, full of mistakes, unnatural English. I don't know who, I don't know if all of the schools in Japan are using the same book, but if that's this particular book is being used at a school where the graduating classes, each grade, I think, has about 250 students, 400, I'm not sure, maybe 400 students. So it's a actually intermediate-sized school in Japan. That's actually not that big, from what I've been told. If that's any indication of the quality of textbooks that are being used, then I'm not surprised. I can't really blame the students for not learning. And any native speaker who uses that book probably finds it awkward.
Oh, I agree. And I've actually seen some of those textbooks in a Korean format because even though I don't teach in public schools, I have seen some of the publications produced by Korean press. And like you said, the English in it is very unnatural. It's very awkward and not how one would actually converse in real life.
Right. Which is one reason I think that movies are great or interviews. Street interviews are actually better in a way because the problem with movies is actually they're too good. I mean, the actors deliver the lines perfectly, so it's easy to hear. But if you're speaking to normal Joes like you and me, of course I guess we're doing our best to be
enunciate clearly
right now as we do this. But if you and I were just hanging out having a couple of beers, you'd be like, yo, well, maybe I wouldn't go yo, but I'd probably relax the way I speak a little bit. And I think a non-native would have a lot of trouble picking that up.
Let's start to wind things down. I wanted to get your opinion because we're entering the end of the year for many of people who are in North America and other areas of the world who may be graduating and looking at an opportunity to teach abroad. And in your opinion, what do you think is a good background, or what kind of attitude would be helpful for someone wanting to either teach in Japan or just teach English as a second language in Asia?
Well, I can't speak for the rest of Asia, but I will.
Sure.
I will say that I'm sure some of the things I'm about to say are true for all countries. One of them, of course, is to have a flexible palate. If you come to Japan and you can't eat anything, or you're one of those people who are very picky about their food, then this might not be the country for you. Though, to be fair, you can probably get by in Japan by eating McDonald's and Western food every day. There's just so much of it. Is Korea like that as well?
Korea is getting more and more like that.
So you don't need to actually do that in Japan, but it makes it much more interesting. I imagine it's harder.
But before you go on that, and I'd like to get your opinion on this based on what you know. Now, if you do take a public school job here in Korea, a lot of times you're eating on campus, and those are all, quote unquote, Korean lunches.
Yes.
So you have less flexibility versus if you're at a private academy.
Same in Japan. Yes, they have the well, you have the option of bringing your own lunch as well.
Sure.
Your bento or box lunch, but they do serve the school lunch. I think they order out for that. They actually have some service that comes in for the teachers. It might be different for the cafeteria. I know that even some of the high schools have convenience stores. So, but of course they offer a little bit of everything. All the convenience stores in Japan have so much Western food that it's amazing. Like I said, it's not such an issue, so much of an issue here. But I would imagine that if you lived in China or Vietnam or Malaysia or Thailand, it would be more of an issue in those countries that are not so Westernized. And I don't say that it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just you wouldn't see so much Western food in those countries from the little traveling I've seen in those countries. So one thing is that have a good palate. The other thing is be able to stick it out. You're going to be faced with situations in which the misunderstanding is going to be the norm, right? And you have to have a patience for that. A lot of people think that their way is the correct way, and they come here expecting everything to be Western. And you have to understand that other countries deal with each other. Their personal relationships will be very different in the way you're used to. One example would be if someone's not happy with what you're doing in Japan, they will not tell you directly, but they will talk about this problem with someone that they know will tell you. So you'll get the message with as little confrontation as possible. So, for example, Steve, if I had a problem with your let's see, your tardiness, for example. Let's say, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't tell you that. I would probably tell your coworker that, or your superior that, and I would make sure that he told you. And that way you would get the message, but you wouldn't feel that you were being confronted directly from the person who was complaining, which a lot of people in the West would say, oh, that's sneaky and that's dishonest, and I wish they would be upfront with me. But it's not because you're a Westerner. That's just the way things are done here. It's common. It's a common technique to avoid confrontation here. So that's something that will happen, and this could lead to a lot of miscommunication and misunderstandings, things like that, So be open-minded, of course. When it comes to education, though, in Japan, if you have a college degree, or if you're from Europe, I think in England they only have a 3-year degree. You can get your college degree or university degree in 3 years. In the States and Canada, I think it's 4 years. That's all you need. It's really very little. You don't need any of those extra. I don't even know what those. There's a dozen
credentials.
A dozen qualifications you can get. You can pick up to make you a better teacher. But to be honest, the best. The best teacher is experience. So just get over here and start doing it, and you'll learn from experience. I didn't know anything when I started. I had no clue what I was doing. But if you want to improve, you can easily do it just by thinking. How can I do this? How can I get this to the students?
Well, that's a good question. How did you become a good teacher? I mean, you started off, I'm assuming, in either public school or at an Eikaiwa, and then you opened your own school, and now you're presenting at teaching conferences. How did you become a good teacher?
Well, I really enjoy teaching, which is probably I never expected I would still be in the same career. I'd still be in this same position pretty much in my career all these years. The only difference really is that I've got my own school and I give lectures to other teachers now. But I just thought about it. I thought, well, how can I make this fun? Oh yeah. So students will know when you're bored with the lesson.
Absolutely.
That will come across even if you try to pretend that you're interested in the textbook. If you don't like the textbook, if you're really bored with it, they're going to pick up on that. So I make my own lessons, and I enjoy making those lessons. I'm teaching the lyrics to a Taylor Swift song that has all these great expressions in it that they can actually use. And it's really successful. This is a group of just 3 girls that I teach in the classroom. They're all high school, and they really enjoy it. And you start using it immediately.
That's awesome.
They grab it. So what I would say is do something you enjoy. Now the problem is if you're coming to Japan to become a teacher in a big Eikaiwa type school, or even a high school, you're not going to have that freedom that I have because I've got my own place. So in those cases, one thing you're going to have to do is accept that in the beginning, at least, you may be nothing more than a mouthpiece, a human tape recorder, as many of them will complain about, especially if you're a JET or an ALT teacher, an ALT teacher, an assistant language teacher. You may not have much freedom at all, but on the plus side, you also won't have any responsibility, which means you won't be responsible for making lessons or grading tests, which is a lot of work.
Very true.
So, there's good and bad with both of it. And to be honest, I could probably save a lot of time by becoming or if I had remained one of those types of teachers, but I wouldn't enjoy my job then.
Victor Boggio is a longtime expat in Japan, and as you have heard several times, has his own language school there. You can learn more about what he does to teach English at youtube.com/actionteacher. Victor, thank you so much for joining me this week.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Now, before I close out this podcast, I'd like to share a little bit of extra information for you. Victor and I briefly touched on this in our discussion, but let me give you something else to chew on. According to Education's first English Proficiency Index, Japan ranks right in the middle of surveyed countries, despite all its education efforts. In fact, since the last survey, both South Korea and Japan's ranking have gone down, despite their incredible investments to improve the English-speaking ability of its citizens. China has actually managed to increase just a little bit, but taking the top spots in Asia are Singapore and Malaysia, probably greatly influenced by their colonial past. It might surprise many, but Indonesia is actually sandwiched right between South Korea and Japan in those rankings. Given these 3 countries, with a substantially less GDP, that they are able to rank as high or as higher than Japan and South Korea, makes you really wonder, what does that say about where those residents place the value of learning English on their priority list? Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think English is a necessary skill for learners in Asia, or is it merely something that's helpful? Have you ever taught English abroad? If you have, I'd love to hear about your experience, and I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments on Facebook or Twitter. Of course, if you haven't found us on social media, you can go to Facebook and just look for Asia News Weekly. That's our Facebook page, of course. Or you can tweet to us at Asia News Weekly. You can also send an email to the show with your questions, feedback, or comments. Just drop a line to podcast@asiannewsweekly.net. You can play and download all of our episodes on our website, but if you prefer the show in podcast form, why don't you subscribe? It's easy to do. Just go to asiannewsweekly.net, go to the top of the page. You'll see a button there that says subscribe. It takes you to a new page where you can find the links for Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, and just about everywhere else where this podcast lives, and gives you the choice on how you'd like to listen to the show. And if you do like the show, I hope you'll take a moment to share it with your friends, and of course, subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Well, my friends, that's it for this week's episode of Asia Now. I'd like to thank you for listening. Until next time, I'm Steve Miller. Asia Now is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.